Torrin, it is great to have you here. Thank you for coming on. Really been excited to have this conversation for a while now, and yeah, thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
Thanks, Tim. Looking forward to it, mate. I'm sure we'll have some fun and hopefully learn some stuff.
Yeah. So my quick sum up of you: you started your first business venture at the age of 24, which actually that's ironic. That's sort of when I started, which is very cool. Back in 1989, over three locations of a video rental business. You then moved your experience into the real estate sector, in leasing and property development. Started your family and had some really good success there. 2008 came along and hit you pretty hard, but you learnt some sort of really resilient things within that time, and that kind of spurred the business that you have today. But yeah, that's my sum up of you. You've got a lot of really good business experience and a lot that people can take away from this one. My first question that I always like to start with a bit of an impact question is, for you over your career, is there one thing that you believe in your coaching and in business that separates people from sort of achieving what they actually want in business? And um, I might lead the question a little bit here, but profit isn't the answer that we've talked about. That's the consequence. But I don't want to lead you too much. Yeah, what do you think stops people from achieving what they want in their business in your experience?
I suppose the first answer that comes to mind is that it's never just one thing. Of course, there's always a whole range of things, and I say that purely not because of not narrowing it down to one or two things, but the truth is, or a subjective truth is that everybody's journey is different. So there's certain different things at certain time that are going to make an impact based on where you are on your journey. So it's really an individual journey. But I think what is a common theme for me, which certainly shifted me going through my business journey, and also when I'm coaching, and it's also something from I've seen out of high performers and people who are really at the top of their game. And not so much getting at the game as in, smashing out of the park, but getting it, doing well in getting the business life that they set out to get, which is, I think, what we're sort of talking a little bit about here. And the answer is that when you start looking inwardly for the answers into who you are, how you're showing up, how you react to the outside world and adapt, become resilient, who you are versus that constant chase of the outside world to give you your inner peace. I think to me, that's a common thread that comes through. And it was certainly a big catalyst for me shifting from where I was in my early business years to certainly where I have been the last 10 plus years, which has, got me to this position where I am now, helping other business owners achieve. So I think if I had to narrow it down to, as I said, I could probably give you a top 10 list. But I think that one in itself, and I wanted to specifically say that because it's not something that's obvious to a lot of business owners out there. It's something that I don't necessarily think about. But when the people make that transition of understanding, when I focus inwardly to who I am and how I'm getting it, they really get the impact that they're looking for in their business life. So to narrow down the question, Tim, I'd say that would be probably my number one thing as an impact to start off with.
Mm. Well, one of the things that a lot of self-employed people struggle with is detaching themselves from the business. Their identity is the business, and as a consequence, we sort of see some negative things happen, both stress-wise and in the business. But then also we can't achieve our personal goals because we don't have any personal goals. We have business goals, and that's it. Do you see that happening, and what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, look, it is a big common problem, and I think like with all these things, the way I like to break it down is to understand it first, and then from there you got a chance of maybe figuring out how to fix it. And I think what we need to understand about people tying the identity to their work environment, their business. When you think about your life in general on a week to week, month to month, year to year basis, your employment arena is the one that you spend the most time in that, whether you're working for someone else or you're running your own business, your working arena is the biggest arena of your life in many cases, and you are focused on that, 40, 50, potentially more hours a week. And there's not too many other things in your life that you're spending 40 or 50 times a week, 40 hours a week focusing on. So the natural deduction of that is it's quite easy why people attach their identity to their work and their business, because that's occupying their brain most of the time in their waking hours. Yes, and it is a trap, because we tend to then all our emotional up and downs go along with what happens on the business. And I often talk about in my my coaching programs is that you are not your business. You're there to serve your business, and you need to separate your identity of who you are versus, and you see this every time, when you speak to someone, so how you going? And the obvious question you always say is, what do you do? Because everybody else wants to figure out where you fit based on your employment. But maybe a better question to ask, which I've tried to do, is what are you passionate about? And that leads down a completely different conversation than what do you do. So I think, answer your question, it becomes a problem. And then, but I can, as I said, the starting point of that conversation is to understand, why do we tie our identity to our work and our business? It's because where we spend most, like I said, the biggest arena of our life is our working life, and it can be up to 40, 50 hours a week. So so I think it can be a problem, Tim, and something that everybody needs to be aware of.
Something that I was really interested to talk to you about is the way that you help business owners deal with the stresses that come up with running a business, but also the things that they can do to become a better leader, in terms of, you put it above the line of courage and below the line of courage. And within that is a particular area that I personally have dealt with, and we'll get into the topic more, but withdrawing from the situation, withdrawing from the problem. But I'll go back to the first question here. When you talk about behaviors that people can do, can you explain the concept of the line of courage and below and above the line of courage?
Yeah, so it's probably the best way to enter this conversation around courage in business, and where it plays a part. Again, I don't think it's enough focus given to people who are trying to drive and thrive in a business. And so my work is really about helping people understand where does courage play a part in whatever it is they're trying to achieve in their business, because I think it's very pivotal. My model, if you like, is sort of centered around the hidden achievement triangle, and there's three things. There's so the three parts of the triangle is focus, connection, and what holds up the triangle is courage. So if you can visualize a triangle, you got focus on one side, connection on the other side, and courage. And I believe that all the problems that we face in our business will have an origin or a pathway for one of these three things, and sometimes a combination of all three or two. But courage is the interesting one for me, as I've delved into it, looked at my own journey and the journey that I follow with my clients. And what I've sort of developed this map of courage, which helps people understand where they're at any given time. And just to sort of be very distinctive here, that we're not talking about courage here where you can jump out of an aeroplane with a parachute and that's a courageous act, or doing something. That's a different type of courage. I'm talking about the courage of managing your behaviors on a day-to-day basis to get what you want. And this map of courage that I talk about is born out of a study from a psychologist called David Hawkins, who did a 30-year study around how people behave and how they empower their life and how they disempower their life. And what was interesting in this study, in which I've adapted and called this the map of courage. So if anybody who has read that book and understands this, it's Power and the Force, by the way, is the name of that book by David Hawkins. So if anybody wants to get into that, they can. He describes it as a map of consciousness. So what I've done is just extracted that out and used courage as a platform to actually help people develop themselves in business. And I see that as a really pivotal, and also in life in general. So what David did is he mapped out all the different types of activities, behaviors, the way people act in their life, and he calibrated them from 0 up to 1,000. With, just to give you an example, shame being at the bottom, if you like, and say only calibrating out of 20 out of 1,000, all the way up to a whole lot of activities that get you to enlightenment, which is 1,000. So there's not too many of us mere mortals get to enlightenment. Maybe the Dalai Lama, maybe there, so what was interesting to me is that courage calibrated at 200. And there was all these behaviors and actions that people take that sit below that courage threshold. And then there's a whole lot of behaviors that people behave and act in above that. So what I've discovered out of looking at that study, and I've read that book and studied and pulled it apart and studied a whole lot of other work around this. And what I've discovered is that courage is the separator between where it is you are now to where it is you want to go, by simply behaving in a way that's going to take you above the line of courage. And just to give you an example, so some of these behaviors, Tim, below the line are things like blame, shame, guilt, fear, complaining, all this sort of stuff. And one of them is withdrawal, which we'll get to, but just for the folks listening, is that above the line are things like, being intentional, empathetic, taking responsibility, accepting where you are, trusting. These are all behaviors that require a level of courage, which is the reason why they sit above the line of courage and not below. So what I've found is that using this with clients to figure out what's their behavior now, where do they spend the majority of their time, and then help them transition into a place that's more above the line of courage. And David's study over 30 odd years discovered that 85% of the population, the world population, live consistently below the line of courage, and only 15% by deduction live consistently above. So what that tells me is only 10 to 15% of people that are really getting and empowering their life to get what they want to get. So I think it's really sort of, if you adapt this into a business environment, we all know that from time to time we're complaining, we're blaming the outside market for our circumstance and situation, and we're not taking necessary responsibility and accepting where we're at. So I think, the key point about this, and we'll get into withdrawal, which I know, you touched on before, but I just want to make the point that it's not about being above the line of courage 100% of the time. What this is about is having the self-awareness to understand when you do fall below the line of courage and you are behaving in a way where you're blaming and complaining and potentially withdrawing, is to catch yourself, to have a system and process in place to be aware when you are, so you can quickly shift to what are the activities that you want to do above the line of courage, which is going to move you and empower you. So the last point I'll make about this is that when you're consistently below, it's disempowering your life and moving you away from what it is that you want to achieve. And when you're consistently above the line of courage, it's empowering you and you're moving towards where it is that you want to achieve. So I think, and just alluding to your question, is that in my experience, when I've spoken to lots of business owners around this, and my study and work and research, is withdrawal in business is one of the things that we do the most. So whenever something gets tough and it gets a little bit hard, the easiest thing for us to do is to withdraw away and maybe retract to our comfort zone a bit. Don't take responsibility for what's happened. We're not accepting the situation. We're looking to blame someone for our circumstances. And so withdrawal is one of the first things that show up, which then leads to justifying your situation, and all the other activity comes in. And you can potentially be caught in this trap for weeks, months, years sometimes. In business, and not actually empowering you and getting you where you want to get to. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a snapshot of that map of courage and how it's pivotal in trying to help someone get to where they want to get to in their business life.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that you and I have talked about in the past has been when we're going through bad periods in our life, if we're stressed, anxious, even myself through depressive periods, a lot of the behaviors that we exhibit when we're in this mode are behaviors that are below the line of courage. Do you see that? And what does that mean? What are those behaviors that are actually showing up that you see consistently if someone's not having a great time in their life at the moment?
Well, I think that, as I said, withdrawal is one of the key ones, but what that does is leads you to complaining and blaming people outside of who you are for what you've got, right? So if you go back to the first question, the impact question, and you sort of asked me what was the thing that made the difference, or one of the things that made the difference, and that is, looking inwardly to who you are versus looking outwardly to what you're trying to achieve. So this is where this falls into, hand in glove, is that when you're withdrawing and complaining and blaming your outside world, what it is you're looking to outside of who you are to justify your position or circumstance. So you withdraw away. But when you start looking inwardly, say, hey, I can take control, and the things that you can take control of is accepting where you are, taking responsibility for a situation, and then being intentional about how you want to improve it. And, look, it takes a level of coaching to help people through this. But the first step is to become aware of it. So some of the other traits, if you like, is that, this all leads to fear, because we're all driven by a safety first position, and we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're going to hurt ourselves, and the brain is built to move us away from pain. So you can see that the antidote to fear is courage. So the only thing that stands in the way of courage is generally fear. Otherwise, you wouldn't need courage to move forward. So that withdrawal is a symptom of what happens to you when things get tough in business. But you need to look a couple of layers below that to figure out, why are you withdrawing? What is it about how you're dealing with your business life situations? Particularly difficult situations, and business is a up and down journey. There's no straight line to success. There's always a curveball coming at you, and that's one of the things of becoming a resilient business owner, is be able to deal and respond to that in a better way. And I think this map of courage, and particularly the line of courage, is a very easy way. It's literally an hour conversation with someone to be able to get them to at least become aware and understand this, potentially accept it. Which is interesting. I know I've said this before, but when I first do this with clients, everybody overestimates how much they spend above the line and underestimate how much time they spend below, because nobody wants to admit that. That's what's happening. So that's an interesting part. And generally within a 15, 20 minute, half an hour period, they come around to, actually, I am spending maybe a fair bit more time below than what I'm prepared to admit. And so, the coaching and the helping around this, if you like, or for the client to become aware of, is just to sort of, track how much time are you spending below, and what do you feel like? What does it throw up to you in your business? What does it make you feel like when you are below versus when you are spending that time above? And I think also what happens, Tim, which is certainly for me when I did all my reflections, is that I started to realize that whenever things were going bad and weren't working out for me, or it was probably because I was stuck and spending so much time below the line of courage. And when things were going well and I was making clear, good decisions, got clarity, direction, and purpose about where I was going, it was because I was intentional and I was above the line of courage on a day in, day out. And as I said, it's not about being there 100% of the time. I don't think that's necessarily the goal, or even achievable for that matter. But it's more about becoming super aware that when you are falling below, is to catch yourself out. So yeah. So I don't know if you want to go further into that, or whether that sort of answered your question.
No, that's really good. And in fact, that's what's important about this process, is it's identifying when you're showing up in the behaviors that are below the line. And if you understand that below the line means, okay, I'm not doing too good, or if I keep doing this, it's going to be, there'll be adverse effects. And then identifying those above the line characteristics, because there would be a corresponding behavior to each one, right? So that would be the thing that interests me the most, is if you can identify that you're showing up below the line, well, what can you do to push closer to that base level, closer to that, and then keep going back to where you were. I think that is very interesting, and it actually correlates with my mental health recovery that I've talked about on this podcast a lot. But yeah, is that sort of techniques you can use to identify, okay, these are the behaviors, what do I do, what next? Because we can understand the theory, but until we put it into practice, it doesn't make any sense. So yeah.
It's a great question, and it's the work, isn't it? At the end of the day, becoming aware of something is the first part. So becoming self-aware of where you are, and I often say to all my clients or anybody who wants to hear that self-awareness is the number one skill in business, is to become really aware of why you're getting your current results, right? So this is a pathway to show you, one of the pathways to show you why are things showing up in your business world that potentially you don't want. And this is not a surface level problem. This is, you know, 1 or 2 levels down where you need to explore. But from a process thing, so the way I sort of, you know, articulate this or get people to understand is that number one step is, you know, becoming aware. Number 2 is accepting. And then number 3 is, well, what's the action? The fourth one is assessing or getting assistance along the way. So who do you need to help you? Whether it's a colleague, someone's aware in your, you know, your circle of influence, or potentially some coaching. And then it's a case of assessing it all the way. So you take people through this process. And I think in the first instance, it's not about trying to change everything 100%. It's like becoming observant in your dialogue and how you're showing up. And I think what is really interesting about this, and this is about that inward journey as well, which is pertinent to this and probably just came to mind now, so I'll share it with you. And that is that when you start to learn this and you start to put into practice, guess what happens? You start to see this in all the people around you. Because remember, if you go back to David Hawkins' study, there's 85% of people that live consistently below the line of courage. So you don't have to go hard looking for this. It's around us in all our relationships, you know, mothers, fathers, parents, brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, partners, all that sort of stuff, right? And it's around us all the time. And so when you start to identify it in yourself, then you start to see people around you behaving this way, and really it sticks out like a sore thumb. And what that does is, over a period of time, so it could be, you know, let's just take a 30-day process if you like. The first step is to really become aware of how much time am I spending. And if that, you know, anecdotally is, well, I'm 80% below and only 20% above, well, what do we need to do to shift it to 70-30 and then 40-60 and so on and so on? You know, so it's not a case of, right, as of tomorrow, I've got this and I'm going to start doing everything above the line as much as I can. It's just becoming aware. And I think once, like the brain works for you, once it becomes aware of something and you start feeding information, it'll help you. You know, and this is part of the training and the help that we do around understanding human behavior when it comes into growing and thriving in a business. So you can see this conversation from a business coaching perspective is not around the tactical, strategic stuff at the surface level. You know, you're very good in what you do around the marketing space, and you know, and equally important to drive a business. Of course, it's a spearhead of every business, but it's in what happens in behind with the person's inner game, who they are, how they're showing up, how they're maximizing the results for the effort they're putting in. This is where that human behavior kicks in, and you know, getting some coaching and training around this stuff is super important. And I've seen it, you know, many clients that I've worked with, where within a space of, you know, potentially 90 days, they're completely turning around their fortunes or where they're going. And it's a lot to do with their mindset, mental space where they're at. And I look at this map of courage as my, you know, pillar of helping people understand. As I said, it's part of the triangle. There's a focus problem, a connection problem, or a courage problem. And so, you know, for me, which one is it of those three to actually give people a springboard to actually help them move forward to whatever it is they want to achieve, you know, because everybody's journey is different, as I mentioned at the start.
Yeah, definitely. Let's get into the withdrawal behavior that's below the line of courage. Now, people that have been listening to this podcast since the start know about my mental health and how that affects me. But withdrawing is also a behavior that people that don't have mental illness deal with as well. But I think to make this episode quite meta and interesting, I kind of want to go into sort of maybe some examples of where I've been withdrawal in behavior, but then also have a bit of a chat about that. So withdrawal is something that happens to me in particular when I start to feel unhealthy. I will first start to withdraw from outside connections, so people that might be acquaintances, whatever. I'll stop posting on Facebook. I'll stop posting on Instagram and LinkedIn, which is quite quite different for me. And it'll then eventually start going closer and closer in my circle. So then it might be okay. So actual client work I might let slip. Which I'm working really hard on having backup procedures in that. So that's actually something that I've learnt and developed, is now building a team around me where if that happens, there's a backstop there. But withdrawal is quite painful there because you've committed to people. So that and then I withdraw from social settings and then family things and so on. So it's like this big circle that comes in. Withdrawal is the number one thing that's stopped my business from being continual. I've done a lot of work now though to kind of get around this. And it's something that I'm really proud of doing. I've learnt a lot through it, and I think in terms of people that haven't gone through it, my communication is now so much better because of it. Because I know that this can happen. If I keep the communication up, then that's a really good way to stop this. But that's some cases on my respect. Where do you see withdrawal showing up? And I guess then a second question, what's your input on what I've just said?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's a bit
to unpack. Yeah,
that's a bit to unpack there, which is cool. I think, look, and appreciate we've spoken about your journey and your struggles along the way, Tim, and I think that to be respectful for that, there's a lot of other people out there, and we want to be careful that we don't sort of say, hey guys, this is the panacea to that, and that if you are struggling with that stuff, is to seek professional help. And I'm here to tell you that I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but when I say but, is from a business perspective. I've done a lot of work around human behaviour, so I understand where this all fits in. And and I've had people tell me that this model is a mental health model as well, in that people who, because and I just want to choose my words carefully a little bit, is that at the bottom of this like map of courage, and this is the map of consciousness that David Hawkins pulled together, shame and guilt sit right at the bottom. And that's one of the triggers for where you're at in your mental health situation, is that you withdraw because of potentially shame, guilt, or you're fearful of what's happening in your world on a day-to-day basis. So I won't go too deep into that, because that's for professionals to advise. And as I said, if anybody's out there who's resonating with this, please seek help around that. But I think from a broader maybe macro here, into say general business life, it's quite often in ebbs and flows of what happens. As I said before, there's no straight line to success. So we all on our business journey find ourselves from time to time in a bit of a trough, of how do we get out of this and move forward and to reach our goals and the things that we're trying to achieve. So I think withdrawal is a natural place, because it's a safety mechanism, to move away from the cold face of the pain. And there are some people who can charge right through it, and they've got that ability. But I would suggest that not many have got that ability to do that. And I think, so where does it show up? It shows up in, difficult situations with clients, customers, your staff, people around you. Interesting enough, it always shows up around people problems, right? So people that you've had a conflict with, you don't see as helping you, moving you forward, or you might have made a mistake in a situational circumstance, so you don't want to face that mistake. So you hope that you pull away, and we talked about this in another conversation, where you might pull away from that situation and give it space to potentially maybe go away, right? But now I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think this is really important for business owners to understand, is that when you do that, and it's very natural to do that, to withdraw, don't allow it to keep going on, because it's not necessarily the conversation you need to have with another person that is dragging you down. It's the cognitive chatter in your own mind day in, day out, that's distracting you from what it is you need to do on a day-to-day basis. Because we're all busy in our businesses and we need to be focused. As I said, one of the pillars of one of the problems is focus. And so if you've got a situation where you're withdrawing from a circumstance in your business because you need to have an awkward conversation with someone, that's going to be a distraction. And one of the biggest enemies of productivity is distraction. And 80% of the conversations that we have are with ourselves, potentially more in some cases. So if you have got these lingering things that you're withdrawing away from because that's the behavior that's creating safety around you, you're going to create more chatter about this particular situation or circumstance, which is going to distract you from what you need to do in your tasks and your projects you're trying to work towards building. So you can see it has a knock-on effect. So withdrawing, yes, it's okay to withdraw, and in some ways, I would actually say, depending on the circumstance, it's a good idea to withdraw. I talk a lot about temperament control, and don't just fly off the handle, shoot from the hip, ask questions, shoot first, ask questions later, as they would say. So I think there's a skill in withdrawing, but it can't be on for hours and hours, weeks and weeks, for a long time. And depending on what the circumstance is, you've got to collect your thoughts and actually deal with it. And you'll find that what that does, no matter what the outcome is that it clears your cognitive space around that. Potentially in some situations, it might make it worse because now you confront a situation and you've added fuel to that. But here's the interesting thing, is that if you tackle those problems above the line of courage with compassion, empathy, being sort of intentional about what you want to achieve, trust in yourself and the other person, and you don't enter those kind of situations with blaming, complaining, and antagonistic, with guilt and trying to put guilt on people or shame on people, you'll find that those conversations become a lot more fruitful and they'll get you moving forward. And it takes away that cognitive drain, which is what the withdrawal is doing. So, that's a little snapshot of actually helping people go, are you a person that gets in conflict a lot with your customers, your clients, your people around you? Well, let's put this through a coaching method, through this map of courage, and you'll find that you can pick up some techniques, some skill around how to doing this better, and you quickly get to a position where you're now starting to overcome your withdrawal situation, because you've got a toolbox and a kit to be able to work through this stuff, So I think, as I said, there's techniques here in business. It's natural to withdraw from a circumstance or situation. We all do it. I'm guilty of it, regularly. But what I've become very skilled at now is recognizing when I am, literally within sometimes 5 to 10 minutes, potentially an hour, and then to go, right, stop everything. What's my intentional process of moving forward through this and actually create? And what it does is, within an hour or two, that problem's now moved on and I can move on to where it is. Whereas, we've spoken about this where potentially some people, they harbour these situations, depending on the size of the problem, potentially for years and don't confront them. And what it does is just keeps dragging them down. They get caught in this trap of living below the line of courage.
Yeah, and one of the things that's actually interesting when it comes to this withdrawing is essentially you can withdraw from that scenario. Say you get a text come in that you don't want to deal with. You can withdraw from that for a day, a week, but you actually don't withdraw from the mental energy that takes up. I think I'm stealing that quote from you because we've talked about that before, but maybe you can actually elaborate on that point for me.
Oh, totally. And I think, as I was explaining in that previous bit there, was that, that's the biggest damage you can do to yourself in trying to drive a business, is that, you want to clear your head as much as you possibly can to focus on the things that's going to impact what it is you want to do on a day-to-day basis. So, withdrawing because of a difficult circumstance or situation, as I said, it's going to create a mental drain because you've got to deal with this. At some point you'll be driving down the road, you're heading to an appointment, you're thinking about what you need to be doing, but then what pops into your head is, oh, I've got to make that call, I've got to send that email, I've got to talk to that person about this thing. And then another day goes by. And the worst thing happens is that when you've got a situation where you've got to confront maybe a client, let's narrow it down to a client, and there is a problem that's like an elephant in the room that both parties know that it needs to be addressed, and they contact you before you get to contact them, right? So straight away, you get on the defensive and you'll start running to below the line of courage, complaining, giving excuses, why you didn't call them, why you didn't deal with it. And you completely, so that actually creates more anxiety than if you had have dealt with it. And the other point that we spoke about, actually, Tim, I do remember now when we spoke about this, whenever it was, a month or so ago, is that we always fear that the outcome of that conversation is going to be a whole lot, potentially 10 times worse than it ever is, right? And I would go as far as say that 90% of those difficult conversations never turn out as bad as what we thought they were going to. And you usually come out the other side going, okay, well, that wasn't so bad. And the reason is if you enter from a place of above the line of courage, where you go to listen and understand, potentially you can turn that awkward situation into a positive, because now you've got some intention around actually helping that person. And if you've got the ability within whatever the circumstance is to add some more value to it, you're going to get that person walking away thinking, well, actually, this ended up becoming better for me than what I was originally intending. Obviously every circumstance is different, but, and I think so. So the point I'm getting to here is that the withdrawal is a natural thing. Falling below the line of courage happens. How do you use the above the line of courage behaviors and tactics to be intentional and drive you forward to actually solve problems? And we haven't spoken about it much today, but this also leads to leadership, right? So leadership of yourself first and then potentially a team. Well, what I can tell you with all the studies I've done around leadership and a lot of the workshops I've done, the clients that I've spoken to, is that leadership does definitely not live below the line of courage, and it lives consistently above the line of courage. So any leader who's out there complaining, blaming, shaming, putting guilt on people to try and get them to achieve, they're not empowering themselves and or their team to achieve. When you've got leaders consistently living above the line of courage, they empower themselves and their team, they gain more respect, the culture is a whole lot better, and they advance forward, which that could be a topic for another day, mate, because that's another big one, the leadership around where the line of courage fits in. And if anybody's out there that want to talk about that, yeah, definitely, because I think that's a really good conversation to have, where leadership sits in all this.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. I actually think it's kind of definitely relevant right now, to be honest. What we're seeing at the moment, particularly in America, but also here in Australia, is what people are calling the Great Resignation. People are giving up on employers that are showing behaviors like what you're saying, that are demeaning, that are pressuring, that are way too over the top, that are pointing behaviors. And people are saying, no, we've got choices now. We don't want to do this anymore. We're going to go and build our own business. We're going to go and follow our passion. We're going to find a company that lets us not only do the job that we want to do, but also lets us do it within this. But if you've got a manager and a process and a system that is consistently living below the line of courage and complaining, and people are just going to resign. That's just what's happening, and we're seeing that. So I think it's quite topical. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, totally. Look, and I think we're talking from a business perspective here, but what's really interesting to me is that this line of courage, map of courage, is pertinent to all areas of our lives, and so it's showing up a lot in the conversation at the moment. So I'd go even as far as to say that on a macro level, I don't want to get into a conversation about what my beliefs around what you should and shouldn't be doing, because I think that's a personal situation or circumstance. But I think the extremes of either side of the argument are consistently living below the line of courage with their behaviour. The moderate people potentially in the middle are probably starting to think about this and live above the line of courage. And as you said, employers companies, government agencies who are forcing people to do stuff based on a shame and guilt, which is a below the line of courage, a deep below the line of courage, is not going to end well for the organisations, for the people involved. And I think what you're saying is this, the great resignation is that people are now starting to really think about their choices about what they want to do, and do they want to stay in that type of environment or not. And I would say that that's good from a perspective where this is the catalyst to get people thinking about this. And maybe for those that are listening to this, if they want to filter that whole conversation through above the line and below the line of courage, and see what it does to them emotionally, whether it makes them feel empowered or disempowered, it's a good way to filter that conversation through. So it's that's a big global issue that's evolving as we speak, basically. Certainly here in Australia and globally everywhere. And I think I'm a student to what the leaders are saying and how they're behaving, as I do with a lot of this stuff. And I quickly, because I know my map of courage pretty much inside out, I quickly place them through that, and I can see whether their behaviours are empowering themselves and the population, or is it disempowering. And it's interesting, fascinating to watch that unfold. And look, as I said, take this conversation back to business environment. Anybody who's a leadership trainer or speaking, who's got good quality leaders, they'll see that their behaviours are consistently above the line. And the ones that are going, well, actually, I'm in an organisation where the leadership is not that good. When you put them through this, you'll see that a lot of the consistent behaviours are below the line of courage, with this complaining, blaming, shifting, guilt, shame, all that sort of stuff that shows up quite dramatically. And so it's a good filter. And as an individual, even if you're not a business owner and you're working for someone else, you get a choice to go, well, I'd rather work with someone who's empowering me and the team and where we're going. And it's just good business sense, right? It's stupid if you are driving a business from a place of below the line of courage, and if you are, you're not moving. They're the people that are not moving towards their goals, and they certainly don't fit in the high performance bracket.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really awesome spot to leave it on. But I have some rapid fire questions that I like to end the show on, just to get to know you a little bit more. So the first one is, in a quick sort of sentence, what do you do, Torrin? What's the what do you do? Yeah.
What do I do? Well, at the moment, I'm very passionate about helping business owners understand how to get the best out of themselves. So I'm very much a believer of, better humans make better business leaders. And although there's a tactical strategic pathway, there's also, people need to build themselves up, and it becomes one of the pillars of their business. So, we're talking about personal growth here and personal development. I like to call it psychological development, because we're all psychologically growing as we go. Sometimes we get stuck and we stay on a flat line for a while, but our challenge in life is to consistently psychologically grow so we can understand ourselves better and then the world around us. So that's what I'm passionate about doing in my work. I've also got a real estate company, which I have been involved in real estate for 20 odd years, and that's sort of my bread and butter in the background. But I'm passionate about it, and I've got a coaching business, Energy Coaching Systems, which help business leaders evolve to better versions of themselves to get what they want out of their business life. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, Tim.
Yeah, fantastic. You've coached so many people sort of get what they want out of life and understand that profit is the result of good behaviors and consistent activity. Has there been a breakthrough with the amount of clients that you've had that really stands out and was a shift that you went, wow, that was really cool?
Yeah. This is going to shock a few people. And I think this is very, anybody who's out there who's got an extremely successful business probably will resonate with this. But so in 2008, when I had my trauma crisis through the GFC, where I lost a lot of zeros and had to rebuild my business life, is that there was a shift in the couple of year period there afterwards, where I started to shift and not focus on actually making money and focus purely on just providing best value I could. And I was coached through that period. to do that and to think about that. In other words, don't focus on the money, focus on how much value you can bring. And that was a real catalyst and shift. The moment I started to change my mindset around that and not worrying, and certainly in real estate, it was always about, well, how can I make my next $5,000, $10,000 or $15,000 commission? And I'm guilty of the fact that that's probably how I thought about my early real estate career. But the moment I shifted to how can I help other people achieve what they want, and then the money will look after itself, it was massive for me. And that was the biggest change. And I would recommend anybody who's in a sales type environment, commission-based business or business in general, is to work on figuring out how do you bring a better value proposition to your clients and how do you help their lives, and then the money will flow from that. So I think how I look at it is money that you make in a business is a lag metric. It's what happens after you've done what you've done. Once you've done it, you can't change it. So you need to focus going forward. And what it is that people want to hear from you is how do you give them value in whatever it is the problem you're trying to solve for them. And that's a very basic principle of business, but it's one that we forget. And I think also we're not trained to understand it, because we think that business is all about more revenue, more profits. How do we make more money? Well, my final thing on that, Tim, is that most customers and clients don't care about whether the business is making money or not. They're worried about how are they getting the value for what they want to solve their problem. And so you know what I mean? Whereas we think that part of our biggest job is to how do we make money? Well, that's not the primary thing. And when I learned that and I shifted that, going back 10 plus years ago now, it was huge. It made a huge difference to where I'm at now.
If you could talk to 24-year-old Torrin, who's just starting his business, go back in time and have a chat to him today, what's the advice that you would give 24-year-old Torrin?
Oh, that's a big question, mate. As I said, there's never one thing. I suppose what I just said, is like get an understanding that customers and clients are more concerned about themselves than they are about you, and we need to be more concerned about them as well. So that I would put that in number one. Probably number two would be, just figuring out yourself and what drives you. That self-awareness conversation about, who you are as a human being, what you're trying to achieve. And look, I understand that certainly as a 24-year-old, it's hard to have that conversation because you're still trying to figure out where you're at in your pathway. But certainly as you evolve, it becomes more and more important. And I think, I'm writing a paper at the moment around, status versus soul. And I think, listening to your soul about what it is that you're actually trying to achieve and not necessarily follow the status pathway, which is inherently driven by, making more money and how do you do that? So I think that was the advice I would give myself but everything else, like being resilient and just pushing through, work hard, all those things, I did that anyway. I just didn't have a structure and a purpose around it. So I think, having some clarity around that and really getting focused on what it is that you're trying to achieve and be disciplined about it. So that's the advice I'd give my 24-year-old self.
Yeah, and lastly, look, to wrap it up, if anyone's heard anything that they resonate with or want to reach out to you and contact you, what's the best places to get you?
Okay, so a couple of places, thanks for that too, Tim, is, my website, attergy.com. So Attergy is ATTERGY. It's a made-up word, which I believe is the founding blocks, and that is attitude and energy when you apply those two things. So I made up the name using those two words and mashed them together. So attergy.com, if you jump on there, there'll be some resources there. You'll see some of the programs we're running, what we're doing. And certainly just, reach out, send a message. There's also a complimentary copy of my real book that I wrote, was published last year in May. The Essential in the Game, which is 10 guiding principles that, would help you build a solid and structured mindset, will certainly, give you at least a starting point. So I would encourage anybody to just jump on there and, put some details in, and I'll send you that in the post directly. No costs, no mailing fees, and it's not a PDF, it's a real book. So there's that. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So just Torrin Minutillo on LinkedIn. Connect with me, join up, send me a question, say good day. Always looking to talk to business owners. Always find it fascinating to have a conversation. And one of my philosophies is to, every time I have a conversation with someone make them feel like they've got something to take away from that conversation. And if I keep on doing that, the world will be a better place, certainly for me and maybe the people that I influence. So they're the sort of just those two simple ways. There's lots of things that I could talk to you about what we're doing, and certainly love to have this conversation around the line of courage and where it may impact some people in their business world. So reach out and say g'day. I'd love to have a chat.
Awesome. I'll put all the links to that in the show notes below. What I also might do, Torrin, I don't know if you have a PDF version of the Line of Courage, but just because we've mentioned it a lot in this show, I might even put a link out to that as well. I know I've got it in an email from you, so I might do that. But yeah, apart from that, I've been Tim, you've been Torrin, we've been talking. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, mate. It's been a pleasure and been great fun too. Thanks, Tim.